Hello, and this is Remy Pengel with the Center for Wind Energy. Today I'll be talking to you about putting energy into context, a brief introduction. We use electricity in all aspects of our life, from heating and cooling, to our electronics, to lighting, to all of the appliances in our refrigerator in our home. So it's important to understand where our energy comes from and how we generate that electricity. It's important also to understand that, of course, we do use more electricity than people did years ago. If you think of a home from the 1960s, you would have some basic appliances, you might have a TV, but our electronics were pretty limited. And if you look at now in the 2010s, our modern home has many appliances in the kitchen, from wine coolers, refrigerators, microwaves, dishwashers, stoves, and then think of all the electronics. We probably have more than one TV. You probably have many cell phones that charge, iPads, tablets, laptops, computers, and then a lot of us also keep an extra refrigerator in the freezer, or a freezer in the garage, so that we have overflow for the food that we are keeping. So we use a lot more than we did years ago, and then on top of that compounds the idea that our population has increased quite a bit since the 1960s. So you can see that our energy needs are more than they have ever been. There are many sources from which we get electricity. As you see here, there are our renewable energies and our non-renewable energies. So you see coal production, natural gas and oil and gas, nuclear energy, wind energy, solar energy, and hydroelectric power. We can get electricity from all of these different sources. Each of these sources works a little differently to generate electricity. For the most part, our fossil fuels, that includes coal and natural gas and oil and gas production of electricity, as well as nuclear, all have the same concept. Something is burned or it gets very hot to create a steam. The steam rises or moves through enclosed volume and expands to turn a turbine. The turbine then spins the shaft of a generator, and the generator generates the electricity. So that would be nuclear as well as our fossil fuels. With wind energy, it's kind of the same idea, except there's no burning involved. The moving air that we call wind moves a turbine that is attached to a shaft, which turns the shaft of a generator, and we generate electricity. And then there's solar energy. Solar energy is a little bit different. It does not have a generator per se. It is based on transfer of energy from photons from the sun. They transfer that energy into a semiconductor that is making up the solar panels, and the semiconductor excites electrons that move, and the flow of electron generates electricity, or is electricity. Hydroelectric plants are also working on a turbine. And because each of those energy sources comes from somewhere different, generates electricity a little differently, then there are pros and cons to each and every one of our electricity generation sources. A lot of the things that we talk about when we talk about pros and cons are the reliability, environmental impacts, cost, if it's renewable or non-renewable. How easy is it to generate? Is the technology new, or is it an old technology that we know really well? Are there aesthetics associated with this, such as wind farms tend to not be aesthetically pleasing to some people? I assume that nuclear reactors and coal power plants and their smokestacks are probably not too aesthetically pleasing. Property values are a concern around most power plants. Sound can be an issue with some power plants. The land use of how much land do you actually use to create that power plant? Does it take up a lot of land? Is it very compact? So there's lots of reasons that people are pro or against different energy sources. And the important thing is to understand how each of these sources work and the pros and cons of each of these sources before you make a decision as to which energy source you are for or against. The other thing in terms of environmental impact are emissions. And it's important to understand that any burning of any fossil fuel will result in a release of carbon dioxide, and increased carbon dioxide levels lead to climate change through the greenhouse effect. And if you're not familiar with the greenhouse effect, the idea is that we have these natural greenhouse gases that surround our Earth, and as the sun's radiation hits the Earth, it is re-radiated back into our atmosphere, and some of it is trapped and some of it escapes. As we increase the levels of CO2 and other greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, the amount of heat that is re-radiated back to our Earth increases, and that increase can lead to many different effects. So the changing climate affects many aspects of our environment. So many people talk about global climate change or global warming. So there's an increase in temperature, and that is seen in some places, but it's important to understand that climate change is making changes in many different ways at different places on the Earth. So here you see a couple of examples: increased wildfires, increased droughts, and an increased severity of storms are some of the big things that you will see. There's a lot of habitat issues with habitats being displaced because of changing climates. There's human health effects. There's many effects. So it's just important to understand that it's not all just warming. It's a change of our environment and the way that our environment responds. And as we think about all these impacts on the environment and other pros and cons of these energy sources, it's important to understand that if we're looking for clean energy sources, the cleanest energy is the energy that we never have to generate. So that basically means that the less we use, the less we need to generate. And that is the cleanest energy we'll ever get. And so there are many ways that we can save energy. And here are a couple of ideas. Energy Star sponsors appliances that are highly efficient, meaning that they do the same amount or the same job with just less power or using less energy. As opposed to some of these other things that you'll see here, the CFL compact fluorescent light bulb is also an energy efficient product, whereas the insulation, the sealer, the foam sealant, and this person turning off the lights as they leave the room, those are all what we would call energy conservation behaviors, things that you can do to actually just keep the energy and use less of that energy. And then understanding the things that you plug into your outlet. So again, here you have an outlet with a little black box that's going to get plugged into it. This could be a cell phone charger, digital camera charger, but that little black box, if it remains plugged in, even if you're not charging an object, it still continues to pull electricity out of the wall. So you want to make sure that you eliminate those, what we call phantom charges. All different ways we can make sure that we're using as little as possible. And then of course, once we've used as little as possible, we have generated the least amount of energy, then we look to generating our electricity from renewable sources. And of course, wind and solar tend to be the most talked about renewable energy sources. We have tapped into a lot of, if not all of, our hydroelectric potential in the United States. So the growth for that is not very large, but wind and solar are still in their infancy in terms of being an installed capacity for generation. And as you can see from these two maps, that there is potential in the United States for both wind and solar installations. So we want to continue to educate people about the possibilities, the pros and the cons, and the potential for generating renewable electricity from renewable energy sources. So now that we've learned a little bit about the context of why we talk about renewable energy, I'd like you to take the quiz on Canvas, and we will then go over the quiz in class. Good luck.